Hello, I am Enrique Barra, and in this video we will see JSX. Let's remember our first React component is this one here, our app component. Is this JavaScript? Well, not. In fact, it is JSX. That is a JavaScript extension to include HTML, to be able to include these tags into JavaScript. Okay, so JSX is the JavaScript extension, is the language that we will use to create our React components. It is simple and familiar for developers and designers. Okay, we could use React without it, but it is not very recommended because in the end it will become very verbose. And as it is a JavaScript extension similar to XML, the JSX tags has a name, attributes, and children. In this case, the name is my button, the attributes are color and shadow size, and the children is just one and is a string called click me. Okay, you can see more info here in the specification. But we can't give the browser JSX because the browser only understands JavaScript, plain JavaScript, not JSX, not TypeScript, not ES6 or ES7 or any other kind of language or variation. So we will need to transform this JSX to JavaScript, to pure JavaScript. We will use a library for this, a tool that is called Babel. Babel is just a JavaScript compiler. You can see it online as in an example here, for example, transpiling this arrow function into a pure function, a function in standard ECMAScript. You can also try it online in real time. For example, the transformation of this component will be transpiled or transformed into this React element that is plain JavaScript, that the browser can understand. Okay? How do we configure Babel? We have a .babelrc file where we say Babel, the plugins that will be used, for example, to transform React, because Babel does many other kind of transformations, or we can configure it in the package.json. Okay? What are the types of elements of JSX? Well, the first part of the tag, the name of the tag, will determine the React element. Remember the convention. Components start by uppercase. React components start by uppercase, and HTML tag by lowercase. So, for example, this is my component that is called my button, that will receive as props these two attributes, and will have one child. And this is just an HTML tag that also will have an attribute. Okay? So, a component, we can see it here now with code, is just a customized HTML with some functionality, because in the end we will add it more functions and more methods. Okay? So it is very object-oriented. A component is an object, is very object-oriented, and it has a render method that will return another components or HTML tags. Well, the attributes are what we call in React props, the props. Okay? The HTML attributes are the standard HTML attributes, ID, class, onClick, etc., so on, but our React components, our React elements will have extra attribute, custom attributes that are called props. If an attribute is quote, it will be a string, and if it is on curly braces, it is a JavaScript expression, for example, like this, or like this, or this expression here. As we have these JavaScript expressions, the ternary operator will be very used, because it is very brief, a very brief way to, depending on a condition, to pass one value or another. And the default value of the props is true by default. For example, these two are then equivalent. Well, how can then we embed expressions in JSX? Well, in these curly braces, let's see a more complex example. in this component that is called greet, we create a function, a method, that is called format name, that receives the user, just as JavaScript does. It's a function that receives the user and returns a string, a format name. We will use it in the render method. How? We can include it here in our HTML part. We can, with the curly braces, call this function and pass it the props, the user that we have received as prop. Okay, so as this component here that is called greet has two props that is called user and age, how do we render this component? How do we call it? How do we use it? Its API is this one here. It should receive two props. So in another component called app, we call the greet component with user and age. For example, in this case, age is a string and user is a JavaScript object. We will call another part that is HTML or other components, and we will render this component with two props, user and age. Well, two warnings, two things that are differently. For example, the first one is that as JSX is JavaScript, there are some reserved words. For example, class and for. We will have to use class name and HTML4. If we don't use them, we will have a warning in the console that is React telling us that they are used this way. And also the camel case. The property naming convention is camel case. So tab index, on click, and many other will become this kind of word with the C in uppercase, with this small exception here, area and data. And what about the styles? Well, the styles are JavaScript objects. Because this is JavaScript, we can't write CSS here, we have to write JavaScript objects. The keys that, remember, are camel case, and are the CSS properties, and the values will be just strings. One example here, the div style. We have color, margin left, and background image. We can, as it is a JavaScript object, we can compose its content here. And how do we use it? As a prop to the div. Style equals curly braces div style. So this is a style, and we used here. Of course, we can also use class name and give a class to the div and use a CSS or Sass file to give styles. But this is one possibility. It is very used, in fact, when we can compose and we have to compose values here. For example, depending on other param or on other variable. How do we render multiple components? Was just one final warning. Well, we can return, this is wrong, we can't return multiple components, we have to wrap them into a div or return an array, like here. These two are right. There is also one possibility that is quite new, to render a fragment or an empty tag, if you want to avoid this div empty here. You can use each one of them except for this one, that is to render or to return several components at the same level. Okay? So thank you for getting here in the video, and see you in the next video.